I said, there's a couple of reasons for that. I said, first of all, when you go into big companies and you go to the home office and everybody talks about customers, most of them have never actually met one. And they have an opinion about these things. And I said, when you're out in the field as a salesperson, you actually know what the customer wants and how they think about this stuff. And I think that's invaluable. And I said, second, no matter what job you have in a company, you're selling. You're selling your ideas internally, you're selling to customers, you're selling to, fix the broken promise that you might have made to a customer. You're selling all the time. And the skills that you pick up for doing that. So, when you're CEO, you're selling when you raise money. When you're CEO, you're selling to your employees when you try to, motivate them and inspire them. You're selling to everybody all the time. And that's your job. And there's no senior executive in a company that doesn't spend a lot of time selling.
Hi, welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers to connect with ideas that resonate and are useful in their professional lives. And we bring in some of the world's most successful operators to share their ideas and their experiences. I'm so excited today to have Mark Leslie, founding CEO of Veritas Software, to share his story. So Veritas grew from going public at $64 million valuation to over $64 billion in valuation, a 1,000x return to the public markets by the end of Mark's tenure, where he'd grown the company to $1.5 billion in revenue and $400 million free cash flow. It's an incredible story. Mark's also been on the board of over 50 companies, private and public, including VMware, Nutanix, Pure Storage, and some amazing technology leaders. He taught for 21 years at Stanford Business School, where I met him and was lucky enough to be a student in his class. I'm so excited to welcome Mark Leslie here today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mark, you may just start off with the story of Veritas is so amazing. I would love to hear just a little bit about how Veritas became Veritas.
I'll try to make it not too long, but it is a long story. So Veritas, there was this company called Tolerant Systems, which had $50 million invested in it. And it was basically to try to do what Tandem did with open systems and commercial chips. So this company had all this money invested in it and all this time, and then they tried to recruit me to run this company, and I wasn't interested in doing that, and they invited me to the board. And 6 months later, the company crashed. They laid off 190 of their 200 people, and the 10 people left was a little software group. And I said to the board, I wasn't interested in the other company, but I'd actually be interested in this one. And they were building software to make Unix competitive with mainframes for commercial applications. That's what they were doing. And to me, that was a very interesting thing. I believed in 1989 that Unix would be ascendant relative to mainframes for the next decade, which not many people believed. It was unusual. So we started out with this little company. Our key advantage was that we had an agreement with AT&T where they had stepped back from doing this technology in favor of some we go to market together, and they were the owners of Unix, so that was a very powerful advantage. And so we started up this little company. We renamed it to Veritas Software, and we went out to all these Unix manufacturers, and we were successful in selling to 60 of the then 100 companies that were offering Unix products. 100 companies, Dansk Data Systems, ICL, they were all over the world, Fujitsu. There were all these companies, DEC, Data General, Prime, everybody had a Unix system. So we ended up closing 60 of those. We raised a total of $4 million. And we ended up being cash flow positive and profitable in 1993, 10 million of revenue and profitability for 4 quarters, which was the metric for going public at that time. And we went public. We raised $16 million. And after we raised the money, we were worth $64 million. So by today's standard, that's kind of a seed round. This is, way back when. And, we then sat down, this is the interesting part of Veritas. We then sat down and said, okay, so this is a great business. We get royalties in. We don't have to go spend a lot of money with our customers. They just, ship the product and send us money, and it's a great business. And we mapped this out, and we could say we can certainly see this growing at, 40, 50, 60% a year as far as the eye could see. And then we thought about well, how big can it get? And we said, these companies will pay us $1 million a year. They'll pay us $3 million a year. If they're not paying attention, they'll pay us $5 million a year. They'll never pay us $25 million a year. They will come to us and say, we're going to design you out unless you want to cut your price. And we're going to cut our price. And then we said, how many of them do we think will survive as the community consolidates? And we said 10. 5 million times 10 is 50 million. So even though business was great, we said, we got an upper limit on this business. And we sat down at that time and we said, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to raise the umbrella here? And we came up with a 4-point strategy. Number one, what else can we sell to the same guys? We acquired a small high availability failover company, which is perfect. Number two, we were all over the Unix marketplace, but we were not. Our file system, one of our frontline products, was not on the Sun platform, but we could put it on the Sun platform ourselves, and we decided to do that. It was a project for us, but then we had to go build a sales force and build the resellers and all that other stuff, and we did that. It was very, very successful for us. And the third thing we said was, someday we have to do more than Unix. We have to do either NetWare, OS2, or NT. We didn't know which at that time, but we wanted to follow all that stuff and eventually have a strategy for that. And most importantly, we said we ought to be in the backup business. And the reason we ought to be in the backup business is because we control all of the data infrastructure inside the operating system. We can have a perpetual advantage, kind of like Microsoft and browsers, right? And then we said, that's a great idea, but we can't do this ourselves because we're a public company. We have to spend, millions of dollars, 3 years, and when you spend 3 years, who knows what you get? Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. It's a big footprint. So we said we have to acquire it. So that's the background to explain how the company evolved, right? So that was all of 1994 we did this. And then my job was to go do all these things, make these things happen. My job and the company's job. And so we looked at probably all the backup companies, and we ended up in 1997 acquiring another public company called OpenVision, which was, in 1996, we were 36 million, and in 1996, they were 36 million. And they had a great backup product, great. So we acquired this company, and we shed all the non-backup stuff. So we ended up with about 20 million of revenue from them. We had 36 million. We did this merger, and the market just threw up on us, right? Our stock went down by 65%.
Oh, wow.
But we finished the year at $120 million that year, which was a miracle, right? We really had the synergy, right? And then the second thing, 2 years, so we finished the year at 120. We finished the following year at 200. And then the following year, with 200 behind us, we acquired the backup division of Seagate, which was an NT product that was getting us into the NT space. They were $200 million. And 200 plus 200, $400 million. When we explained this to the market, they said, that's even worse idea than the last one you had. And our price went down by 75%, our stock price. But we finished the year at $700 million.
That's insane.
It's insane. And then we finished the following year at 1.2 billion. And then we went into the year of the nuclear winter in 2001, 1.5 billion, 400 million of operating profit. So how did we get there? We got there by strategic transformation. What we became known for was not what we started out as. And the way we got into that business is by doing a strategy and by executing a strategy. We weren't in the business of doing acquisition. We were in the business of doing strategy. And the acquisition was the mechanism for getting there. Many acquisitions, mergers, whatever, kind of remind me of, you wake up in the morning and you turn over in bed and look at the person next to you and you say, what was your name again? And that's what a lot of them are like, and that's why everybody's so kind of negative about these things. But by the time we did these transactions, we had thought about it for years and years and years, and we knew we were right, even though the market thought we were stupid. So to put an end point, we went public at a 64 million market cap, and when our market cap peaked, was 64 billion, was 1,000 times.
That's insane.
As a public company.
That is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Now, I left at that time having lived my dream, but I left behind a strategy that my successor didn't think was very good, and he went his own way. And I think, I have no regret for my way I lived my life and what I did, but I have regret for what I didn't do by staying, which I didn't want to do. But it was to buy VMware, and I was on the board and knew the technology ice cold. My early years in business, I was the architect of the first ever software hypervisor. And then the second thing we were going to do was going to roll up all of the Linux enterprise properties, Red Hat, MySQL, JBoss, and compete with Microsoft. So the Veritas would have been a three-pillar company of storage management, virtualization, and enterprise operating systems. And I believe today, if had we done that, there would be AWS, Microsoft, and Veritas. That's what I believe.
That is crazy, and it's
that's a strategy, and that's a strategy we had thought about for a long time and said, where to from here? We're now like the king of backup, but what do we do for storage management? What do we do from here? And that was the next transition.
I'd love to continue and talk more about that. So when you think about like that transformation from, hey, this is a product company to being a strategic transformation company, can you maybe share, how does that happen? How do you think about the people? How do you think about the processes? Like, you spent years in order to make all this different strategic transformations work. You had a lot of preparation. How would you think about people in the audience who are thinking about like, what is the sort of next, what are sort of the future steps for their company, and how would you sort of share with them how to prepare?
Crafting a strategy, people think you have an idea session, a brainstorming session, and you sit down and you go through everything and you walk out of the room and you got an idea. And I don't think it works like that. So we actually spent a year doing this. We collected what we believe were the best intellects in the company, regardless of rank and the title. Some of them were software developers. We got in a room and we said, so what do we want to do in the future? And we sat down and I started off by coming up with a really stupid idea, because that kind of frees people up to come up with ideas. And we came up with many, many ideas. And then we went through the process of, talking about them and eliminating and getting down to, some smaller number. And then what we did was we did a business plan for each one. So we looked at the competition, we looked at the cost of getting into the technology, we looked at, the growth rates, we looked at everything, right? And we looked for efficacy. We said, which one hunts, right? Which one actually would work for us? And that's how we came down with those four things. And we believed when we finished that was the right thing to do. And we didn't know how it was going to come. We didn't know that it was going to transform the company that way. But we knew that was the strategy that we had to follow. And then we evangelized it throughout the company. We talked about it all the time. We gave updates in the company. There was no secrets about what we were doing. So it was very and by doing that, and by evangelizing it, by talking to people, by going out and talking to backup companies, I probably visited 20 of them, right? You either convince yourself that the idea is better, or you convince yourself that the idea is not as good. So by executing the strategy over a long period of time, you get to examine it over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's super interesting. There's a number of, so what I thought I heard you say is there's a number of components to creating the strategic transformation. It's about having the right people, it's about having the right information, it's about having the right process,
Correct.
about sort of ideation and planning and comparing and validating.
And we kind of had these little subcommittees, that were assigned. Go build a business plan on this one. Go build a business plan on that one, and come back and bring it in and present it. Right. So that's what we did.
And how do you think about what's obvious about how you run this process, and what's sort of the non-obvious things? So is it that you bring in someone from corp dev, someone from engineering, someone from marketing?
One of the things that people think you do is you hire a VP of strategy. You don't do that. Strategy belongs to the senior executive team collectively, belongs to the CEO. And one other thing you don't do is you don't hire an outside consulting firm. My opinion is that any CEO that hires an outside consulting firm for strategy should be fired, because the job of the CEO is strategy, and they're the ones that know stuff. And the outside, consulting firms, that basically borrow your watch to tell you what time it is.
Yeah, I love that. So when you think about what are the, so it sounds like you do it with internal people. It sounds like it starts with the CEO. And who do you bring to the table? You mentioned, everything from engineering to other folks.
Oh, everybody in the company is involved with this. The company's not very big at that time, right? So
how many people, ballpark?
When we were doing this, I don't know, 35, 40, something like that.
35, 40 for the entire company?
Yeah.
Got it. So
it was a $10 million company.
$10 million company at 35 people, like back in the 90s, that's still pretty high, like revenue per employee.
We were profitable for the last year.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
So, people weren't that expensive like they are today.
It's very different world.
Yeah.
So when you think about that journey, how do you go and find out? Like you talked about, like understanding the backup market. You're talking about selling into these sort of the whole market of sort of Unix providers. Like how do you do that? Is it just like you're on a plane all the time? Is it how do you physically get that?
We understood when we were doing the strategy. We understood the backup. The backup market, it's around today. It's been around forever. It's interesting. I'm on a company now that's in the backup business. I call it it's a technology that keeps on giving. No matter how many backup companies, there's always new ones. It's pretty cool.
And how do you think about that, that early CEO days and actually doing sales? Sales is something that, a lot of folks who come from a technology background, it's kind of foreign and it's alien. And how do you think about marrying those two together?
Well, when my younger son decided at one point in time to get in the tech business, I said, you ought to start in sales. I said, there's a couple of reasons for that. I said, first of all, when you go into big companies and you go to the home office and everybody talks about customers, most of them have never actually met one. And they have an opinion about these things. And I said, when you're out in the field as a salesperson, you actually know what the customer wants and how they think about this stuff. And I think that's invaluable. And I said, second, no matter what job you have in a company, you're selling. You're selling your ideas internally, you're selling to customers, you're selling to, fix the broken promise that you might have made to a customer. You're selling all the time. And the skills that you pick up for doing that. So, when you're CEO, you're selling. When you raise money, when you're CEO, you're selling to your employees. When you try to, motivate them and inspire them, you're selling to everybody all the time. And that's your job. And there's no senior executive in a company that doesn't spend a lot of time selling.
How do you think about the people who are like amazing at sales and the people who really get technology? I mean, you talked about like being the architecting, the hypervisor, and I imagine you surround yourself with folks who are great at both. That's been a challenge, I think, for a lot of different CEOs. Like, how are you able to sort of find those people that can do both?
Well, you don't. People who are great sales machines aren't necessarily great CEOs. They are great sales machines. And sales is a very, very quantitative business. The creation of the process and the management of sales is very quantitative. You measure everything. You measure productivity. You measure the value of the territories. You measure the activity of how many visits and phone calls and whatever. You measure everything. You do deep inspection. So a great sales machine, an individual who's great at that, is great at that. But that's not the sales I'm talking about when I'm talking about the sales of a CEO. It's the influence and influencing people and creating excitement and interest in things of that nature. Now, that being said, I interview candidates all the time, and I always end the interview by saying, if we make you an offer, will you accept it? And that's what salespeople do all the time. They try to close, you ever heard of the ABCs of sales?
Always be closing?
Always be closing. Yeah. So I'm in an interview with a guy. I don't know if we're going to hire him, but I'm going to try to close him anyway, see if we could hire him, right? So I always ask that question because I'm an old sales guy.
And what do you? That's awesome. How do you think about the culture of the companies in terms of, do you want to take engineers and turn them, moving more salesy? Do you think about like the salespeople and moving them more technical, or they should kind of just be apart and mix and match?
Well, engineers and salespeople are different. I actually started out as an engineer, became a systems engineer, support to sales. And then I said, how come I do all the work and they make all the money? And then I became a sales guy, and then I went into management, right? But one of the things I remember early on is the engineers would complain, how come the sales guys make so much money and they make more than us, and we're so much smarter than them? You know that. And I have a very simple answer. Like, you can be a salesman. You want to go into sales and make a lot of money? No, I don't want to do that. I said, that's why they make a lot of money. Right?
Yeah,
they're different. Look, people have different character, and it's very important to recognize that people who go into sales are driven for the glory of winning. They're driven by the money, and they're willing to accept risk, the risk of getting turned down, right? Losing a sale is like, asking someone for a date and getting a no, right? You feel bad and you feel terrible with the big deal that you've been working on for a long time. And you have to be willing to take that risk in order to be successful to do that. And engineers don't want to do that. They want to go do engineering things, and they should do engineering things. I love engineers. Say, what makes engineers happy? What makes engineers happy is when they build something that people use. That's what makes them happy. And that's a great thing, right? They change the world in their own way, right? And I love that. Now, we got to teach them how to talk to each other. That's the important thing. When we did that merger in 1997, that first one, we were 140 people. 5 years later, we were 6,000. When we did that merger, the prior year we were 36 million. 5 years later, we were 1.5 billion. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely. How does that happen? So you're going from a tiny company to a massive company, yeah. Small revenue to massive.
Yeah.
How do you think about culture? How do you think about the people you bring in? Like, how did that part happen?
We had a strong culture going in. We went through this merger with a company, had a completely opposite culture, and we had a lot of difficulty. That first year of that first merger was the worst year of my business life. It was a very difficult year. But we ended up bringing them in. A little side story, right? They were a bunch of, we were a sleepy little software company where everybody worked in one building. And the other company was a bunch of ex-Oracle sales guys. So you couldn't be more opposite than that, right? So we do this merger and everything. And there's a culture clash, right? I mean, between the two companies, and we were, very, we were not a top-down company like Oracle. Oracle was like, command and control. We were like, let's get everybody to agree on things, and we did that work, right? So the people in the company, my company, the old company, used to come in and say, what are we going to do about this? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, they're trying to get you fired. I said, yeah, I know that. And I said, well, what do you think we ought to do? Well, we ought to tell them how to behave and what our culture is. And I said, well, if we start telling them, we have become them. We have become command and control. Is that what you want? Oh, no, we don't want that. And they said, well, what should we do? I said, what we should do is we should set a good example, and we should hope that they pick it up. I remember when we did this, and I was aware going in that it was going to be difficult, and we closed the deal. Their senior executive in the company was their senior sales guy, and I invited him out to lunch in the first week, and we sat down, and I said to him, I said, listen, I said, I'd like to just say one thing and then we can enjoy lunch. I said, my opinion is if you want this merger to work, it will. And if you don't want it to work, it won't. And I hope you do the right thing. And I don't have anything else to say.
So one thing you've written about in this topic, on the Arc of Life, is this concept of gravity, right? And you're talking about a transformation from 64 million valuation as a public company to 64 billion, so 1,000 times. Or this concept of gravity, right? How does a leader, how do you go from 64 million, just in terms of like sheer number, right? 64 million market cap.
You do it one day at a time by putting one foot in front of the other. You don't do it by saying, okay, we're going to go to 64 billion. You can't do that. It's just impossible to do that. You have a strategy, you have a culture. We had great operational, accountability in the company, as well as a very embracing culture, right? So we did both of those things. And you go do what your strategy is and you start executing it, and you do it one day at a time. One day at a time, one deal at a time, one decision at a time, whatever. And that's what you do.
What are some of the tools that you used, like with your team, whether it's cadences or strategic reviews, to get people into that new culture?
Yeah.
Right.
So I give examples. So at the executive level, every executive had a quarterly goal. And they had, 3 to 5 goals that they would put on a piece of paper that were measurable. And instead of me being judgmental about them, and we had money tied to it, but instead of me being judgmental about them, the process we used was, okay, so now that you have your new goals, we're going to present all these goals to the company. We're going to have an all hands meeting and we're going to present this. And next quarter, you're going to present how you did against your goals to the company. So we used, kind of the strength of do I want to get up and embarrass myself by not making my goals, right? Now, at the same time, I told them, and this is really important, I said, look, if you do all your goals and you didn't actually do the right thing for the company in a moment in time that was strategic, you're not going to get your bonus. And conversely, if you didn't do your goals because something came up and you changed course and you did do the right thing for the company, you will get your bonus. And that's an important idea that doing the right thing for the company trumps the details of the goals. So that's kind of, and we had this cadence, sales had their cadence. They used to do what they call deep inspection weekly, right? Every manager sat down with every salesperson, every regional manager sat down with every regular manager, and they went through all the deals and everything like that. We always had great forecasting and stuff like that. We made 44 quarters in a row. We always went into a quarter with backlog. We always were, in terms of we were never, one of the big things that companies do is they borrow from the future, right? It's like, oh, we're going to go close these deals for next quarter. We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. We never did that kind of stuff. And that was me. I mean, I didn't want to do those things. And we said, let's have a more modest goal and let's make it, and let's have excess that we can kind of pad the next quarter. You can't make 44 goals in a row without sandbagging. And when you sandbag in the public markets, you get rewarded for that.
Can you share more about those processes? You talk about deep inspection weekly. How do you think about your sort of weekly, quarterly, annual cadences? How do you think about the strategy roll down versus?
So there's strategy and there's operations, and they're obviously related, but they're also different. So every 6 months we built an 18-month operating plan. And the 18-month operating plan, whenever you have an operating plan, everybody's bidding for resources, right? And it was very important to me to build a culture. Remember, I talked a moment ago about getting people to do the right thing for the company. So that shows up in the operating plan thing, where people might walk in, the sales guy might walk in and say, I want more salesmen, but I think this product needs more engineers, and I'm willing to give something up to do that. So we were able to do that in the company. We would have people building an operating plan that was the right thing for the company, not by department, right? So we would do this every 6 months for 18 months. I don't believe young companies can can actually forecast more than 6 months. And we did 18 months because one of the mistakes company made, they do an annual plan, and in order to make the annual plan they starve their hiring in the last quarter, and then they go into the next quarter and they're just screwed, right? I mean, they're in trouble at that point in time. So in order to recognize what your staffing has to be at the end of the year, you actually have to know what the goals are for the next year, the quarter beyond that. And in sales, it's a very, what is the productivity? How long does it take to get there? Et cetera, et cetera. It's all formulaic, right? So typically that's what you're worried about, is making sure you have enough staffing. The same thing with projects. If I'm going to deliver a project in quarter one and it ain't staffed in quarter four, it's not going to get delivered. So there's all this stuff that goes into it. So we did that. Then we do quarterly goals. We break that down into quarterly goals. We break that down by department so that all the quarterly goals ripple down. Once a department head has a quarterly goal, it ripples down into the organization. Everything gets measured, and we go from there.
That's just something that all CEOs are just kind of like figuring out, which is like, okay, do I have what's the rhythm of the business process? Like all these different processes, all these different reports.
It's a cadence, right? I mean, there's a cadence that the company kind of operates on. It's a clock that goes around, right? And each time you hit an hour, you have another event that it triggers, right? So we did that. We did that well.
And when you think about the different companies you've seen, does it work better where there's sort of like there's a central team that manages all the cadences, or does each department run a cadence? Does it come from the executive team? Like how do you have you seen it structured? Well,
you don't run things. People do. It's what you have to do is get people to do what they're supposed to do that's consistent with that stuff, and that's an issue of culture and how you deal with people. Look, I mean, one of the sensations you have. So we go to 6,000 people, and I think about like something comes up in the company. I don't know what's going on. We got 6,000 people running around doing stuff. Do I know what they're doing? I have no idea what they're doing. I hope they're doing the right thing, but I have no idea what each person is doing every day. And the way we do that is we get them to buy into the vision and to buy into the strategy and to be inspired by it so that they can see day to day that what they do matters, right, relative to this whole thing. And that's how you do that, in my opinion.
When you're building these organizations, 6,000 people from a very small company, and you're the founding CEO, how do you think about the things that only you can do versus the things that get delegated out? Like, how do you think about your time as that founding CEO?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I thought about this. I actually wrote a little piece called, what does a CEO actually do? Did you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I thought about this. I said, well, so what do you actually do every day, right? So how does this all work, right? So every day I think about, what I'm going to do today. We all do this. We look at our calendar. I got appointments. I got a lunch, whatever, And then every day we think about, in 2 weeks from now, I have to make a presentation. I haven't worked on it yet. I better put some time into that, and you might schedule that. And every day we think about like, how are we doing in our revenue? How are we doing on our projects? How are all these things going? We used to meet our management team met every Monday morning. We used to meet every Monday morning, and we used to have an all-hands meeting every Monday afternoon. So that was part of our very important part of our cadence, right? By the way, once a year, I used to say to my management team, I say, your meeting as much as mine. We spend our time every week. If we spend 3 hours here, what do you want to do? You want to do what we do, or you want to do other things? Let's talk about that. And we would talk about how we spend our time. That's a good thing to do. It gets them to kind of have some ownership in this whole thing, right? Every day I think about the month. Every day I think about the quarter. Every day I think about the year. And most important is every day I think about the 5-year strategy. And I think about it every day because it's kind of on my mind. And I have a very, very strong belief that when you have a 5-year strategy, that it becomes a North Star. And that when you make decisions from day to day, that those decisions are informed by this long-term vision. And part of management of the company is to get the employees, to get everybody in the company to have that. They may not know it, they don't think about it, but because that's inculcated into them, where we're going in the future, it informs your local decisions. And that's, I think, very, very key to getting people to do the right thing. Because you can't, nobody knows what people are doing. I mean, it's just like, it's ridiculous, right?
You know, you've also been a board member of over 50 companies, private and public, and I'd love to just, learn about that experience. So, why do you do it? And, what have you learned so far, sort of from the start till now?
Well, so first let me give the CEO perspective on this, which the boards at the end of the day, they actually only do one thing, which is hire and fire the CEO. That's really the only thing they actually do, right? They do a lot of other stuff, but that's the only thing that really has impact. And I tell CEOs that, if you don't do what your board wants, you may or may not get fired. But if you do what they want all the time, you will definitely get fired. And what that means is that you have to have a belief and commitment, and your job is to go convince them. And that's the job of the CEO, so that you can go do what you want to do. At the end of the day, you have to stand up for what you believe in, and you can't say, "Oh no, just because they don't agree with me, we're not going to do what we think is the right thing for the company." Because the job of the CEO is to do the right thing for the company. So first thing I do is I have that perspective, having been a CEO and having had a board and everything like that. And that's, there's a lot of people in the venture business that weren't actually CEOs, so they don't have that thing. So that's first. So second, I look at people on a board of directors. There's usually inside directors, there's usually investor directors, and there's independent directors, and I'm an independent director. And I basically view that as having no investor interest or employee interest. My interest is independent of that. And I try to act that way. I do act that way because I am that person, right? I am not a venture investor, and I am not on the management team, or a founder team, whatever it is. So I have, when we come to issues, particularly of issues of stock and price and all those things, which everybody gets passionate about, a lot of investor board members pay a lot more attention at meetings when you're talking about the price of the stock than when you talk about other things, right? I mean, that kind of gets everybody's attention. Same thing's true in the company, right? Who owns the stock, how much of it, et cetera, et cetera. That's always very controversial between the two parties. And I'm really kind of a neutral arbiter of that. I have, my own opinions, whatever they may be, and I express them. So third, it's not really the investor employee thing, but third, I have, having been on boards, I have a certain internally a humility about it. You can't tell management what to do. You basically can influence them. You fly in, once a quarter, you spend 3 hours with them, then you fly out and do something else with another company. These guys live at 24/7, and I have a deep respect for that. And I don't come in and say you ought to do this and you ought to do that. I don't have the word "ought to" in my vocabulary when I go to a board meeting, and too many people do, and I don't think that's good. So I respect that. But then also, I'm also in a board when you have a CEO and things aren't working, and they don't come in and do the right things, and I'm not reluctant at all to make a change. And I tell other CEOs, I say, if you want a job with job security, the worst one in town is being a CEO, because they have very little job security.
Yeah, totally hear you. And very much in the boat. When you think about like the sort of best board members that you've seen and worked with versus the ones that are maybe a little earlier career, like what kind of distinguishes sort of that really mature, high impact, helpful board member versus ones that are kind of learning the ropes?
I'll give you a real short answer: scar tissue.
That's
people who've been through stuff and they've had experience, and also, I've been on boards with some people who have their own scar tissue, whatever it might be, but they're just know-it-alls, and everybody just hates being in a room with them. So Yeah, but I think people who are thoughtful and have experience and have gravitas, if I can use that expression, have judgment. I think those are the people that are great board members.
And what are your thoughts on some of the negotiation that happens between the board and the management team in terms of target setting, in terms of strategic direction, in terms of influence? Like, how do you think about those dynamics?
I have very strong feelings. I tell CEO, I was at a board meeting yesterday morning. We had this came up. CEO says, I'm setting goals for the engineering guy, and I said, and this is goals they're going to measure and pay bonus on, right? I said, you should not do that. You should have him set the goals. You can discuss it with him, but he has to set the goals so that he has ownership in those things. When it's your goals and they don't happen, they shrug their shoulders and say, I told you we couldn't do that. Why did you put it in the goals, right? And they may say that internally. That was BS, right? I believe that people have to step up and decide and propose their own goals. We can discuss it and stuff like that, and then you can hold them accountable. If you set the goals, you can't hold them accountable. You can make believe you're holding them accountable by not paying them, but you don't hold them accountable mentally and emotionally, intellectually and emotionally. And for CEOs, between the CEO and the board, I tell the CEOs, I'll give you the example. You come up with a plan to do $9 million next year, young company. And the board says, we think you can do 12. And then you have this lengthy discussion. And you end at 11. And then the year goes by and you do 10. Would you rather do 10 on a $9 million goal or 10 on an $11 million goal? Do you want to have the discussion about the goal's performance at the end of the year when you missed it, or at the beginning of the year when you could say, that's what we're going to do. You guys can talk about whatever you want, but we're going to do $9 million. We're going to do our best to do better than that, but we're going to do $9. And look, you set the goals. And so if they, you have to stand up and say, that's what we believe. And if you don't do that, you're setting yourself up for failure. And you miss you're a CEO and you miss your goal by a substantial amount a couple of years in a row, you don't have a job. So it isn't your problem anymore.
Yeah, 100% makes sense. Maybe just to double click on that, when you think about this concept of having people set their goals that were aligning towards the company strategy, how do you deal with goals that won't get us all the way there? If one of the executives is sandbagging so they don't miss, like are you okay with that? And then there's a gap with the strategy, or how do you manage that?
Well, look, have a vivid memory, a little story, right? So I was worried about sandbagging, because you sandbag and you end up with kind of the wrong number, right? And I sat down with our CRO and I said to him, look, I want you to give me an honest number with no sandbagging. I'm going to go, because they go into the meeting with the negotiation with the other executives, and the CEO always turns around and said, look, we want to do more things, we need more revenue from you. I said, if you give me an honest number, if we have a personal contract that you give me an honest number, I will not come back to you for more, I promise you. Now, so the first time we go through this, does he sandbag? Does he trust me? Probably still sandbags. He probably doesn't trust me completely. But I stand by that. I say, oh God, I'm going to stand by that. And I demonstrate to him that I'm honest about that. And next time around, get an honest number. And I say, look, if you sandbag, I'm not going to be able to build the products that we need that you're going to want to sell next year. So what do you want to do? I'm not going to be able to hire enough people to make the customers happy. You're going to have fires all over the place. So you're part of this team here. What do you want to do? Give me an honest number. And we ended up getting honest numbers. Later on, much later on, and this is part about what I call micro leadership. I took the CRO aside and I said to him one day, I'm taking you off your revenue plan. All CROs are, like they get, a base salary and they make all their money on their bonus, which really encourages sandbagging. And I said, I'm going to put you on my plan. I get paid by EPS, earnings per share, after all this stuff that you go through. You're going to manage the entire company, including how much taxes you pay in order to get to EPS. And I'm going to put you on the same plan I'm on because I want you to think the same way I do. And he thought that was a great idea because now he kind of stepped up to a higher level of accountability. And it worked really. I put all my executives on that when we became a bigger company.
Very cool. And maybe just a follow-up question on the other side of that. We talked about a CEO setting goals to their engineering leader. And how do you think about sandbagging, and does that work for engineering as well versus revenue in terms of the things that they're going to deliver? So the example is, hey, we bring in this much revenue, this is what we can build.
What we want to do as a company when we're sitting there doing the operating plan, we want everybody to be honest. Just the same. I mean, we want the tech guys to the engineering guys. We want everybody to be honest. So we're all in this together. Okay. Now, once we're all honest, my job is to go sandbag with the board and the investors, right? So we used to take the sum of all of the assigned quotas to all of the sales reps in the country. We used to take 20% off that. Then we would take 5% off that, and then we take 3% off that, so close to 30%. The lowest number was the number we gave to the board of directors. That was our plan. The next lowest number was the number that we gave to the outside investors, and the highest numbers were the numbers we were working on. Okay, and we beat our goals all the time. Oh my God, how did that happen?
That's awesome. Thank you. So let's, I'd love to spend a little, just to kind of close off the conversation, I'd love to talk about some of your teaching at Stanford, some of the papers that you've written, and just kind of double click.
Yeah.
So one that's, I think that people talk about a lot is arc of life. Could you just kind of share the top level ideas there?
Yes. So this was, I went through the experience at Veritas, and it influenced in how I think about things, right? How I think about building great companies. And we have lots of examples of great companies, and we have lots of examples that once were great companies, okay? So it's an interesting thing to think about. So the arc of life says that every idea has some period of time when it goes out of style and loses its power. So you come up with this great idea, you have this very high growth rate, you eventually peak on this thing, and eventually, it becomes harder and harder to make your numbers, and sometimes they start going down, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's an arc. It's an arc of life for an idea. And great companies can in fact build new businesses and transformations on top of that. And there's a million examples of it, but just simple that everybody knows about. Amazon was a bookstore that shipped you the book in the mail instead of having you walk into a bookstore. They basically said, "Oh, you like that book? I'll ship it to you." That's what they started out as. They raised a lot of money. They became then they said, boy, wouldn't it be a great idea if we didn't have to ship the book because it's heavy and expensive? We just ship the bits. So they came up with the Kindle e-reader, which I'm a big fan of. I use it all the time. Read every day on it. Love my Kindle. And that was a great idea. And that really, transformed that business, right? You didn't have to go buy books from publishers anymore and ship them out and have big warehouses full of books. You could just ship the bits and pay the publishers and whatever. And then they said, if we're shipping out books and bits, why don't we ship other things, because we're pretty good at this stuff. So they decided to have other people come on the site and become merchants, and they built this, kind of gigantic store, the Amazon store, which, has everything in it today. I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon. Because they had to manage this whole thing with all these merchants, they kind of built this infrastructure. And that's the infrastructure that became AWS. So if you look at the story of Amazon, and then they're doing all kinds of other things, but if you look at the story of Amazon, they took risks to do all these things. They kind of built one business on top of another. They kind of an arc, and then they built an arc, and then they built an arc, and do they ship any hard copy books anymore? The original one? I don't think they ship many. They still do, but do they ship many of them? I don't think so. Not very much. So that business is probably pretty much died at this point in time. Now, let me give you some other examples. Microsoft, a truly great company in the PC days, right? I mean, they became dominant as compared to IBM, which had originally complete hegemony in the computer industry. And then Microsoft did. It was really an amazing story. And they did many things also. There's all kinds of stuff they did. They got into the Xbox business. They got into the Office business. They got all. You can go tell that whole story. But Gates retired, and Steve Ballmer took over. And Steve Ballmer made every quarter for 15 years, and the stock went down. And the stock went down because Microsoft became kind of irrelevant, because the world had passed them by. In the world of Steve Ballmer, it was unthinkable that you could put Office onto an iPhone for less than $400, which was the price they charged on a PC. It was unthinkable. So they made the product, they built it for the thing, they said it was $400, and nobody bought it. Duh. And then they fired him, and they, don't let anybody tell you different. He was fired. We know the backstory. And they hired Satya Nadella, and today the company is the most valuable company in the world. How did that happen? Well, Steve Ballmer was, a guy who was what I call operationally driven. The company ran well. They made their quarter 15 years in a row. And Satya Nadella was a visionary and was willing to take risk and transform the company. And first thing he did was he said, let's just give away Office on the phone. I don't know if you remember, it was way back when. It was a shocking decision, right? But he's the one that kind of built the whole web business and all the other things. He's really an amazing guy. I don't know him personally, but I have a lot of admiration for him. Now, who's the new Steve Ballmer? The new Steve Ballmer is Tim Cook. He's been there, 10, 12, maybe 15 years now. And I don't know how those new products are going to do, but for 15 years, there's no new products. Nothing. There's just, an iPhone with a better camera and more memory. Duh. And a faster processor. And the faster processor and more memory and better cameras is free because, the rest of the industry is developing these things. So where's the innovation? And they come out and say, oh, it's got square corners instead of round corners, or it's got titanium instead of, steel. And they think that's a big deal. It's nothing. There's just nothing going on there. There's no new products, and he's the guy that ran the thing operationally, and they have an unbelievably great franchise with their app store and stuff like that, which I think the government's going to kind of, put an end to that. But he's now kind of come out with a new product. We'll see if it's successful. But my question is, where's the Apple car that they've been talking about for 15 years? So where is it? It's now maybe in 2028. And by the way, the idea of having no steering wheel and no pedals, that idea is gone. They're just going to go build another electric car like everybody else. I don't know if you're aware of this. That's the plan right now.
Yeah, I think it's been in the news, and there's been some.
So I think there's an arc of life in the company, and in the paper I talk about the best time to consider transformation is after you have won in your original product. You have reached a point where you've got a lot of momentum, and the risk is out, and before you kind of hit the apogee over there, that's the time to be able to take risk. Because you can fail and you can still have a good company, right? And you can maybe try again. And once you go over the top, you're really kind of occupied with, shutting factories, laying people off, cutting costs, and things of that nature. And you can't take risks at that time. It's just too risky, if I can describe it that way. So there's an optimum window of opportunity to take risks. And the second thing that comes out of that is that these two kinds of leadership, opportunity-driven versus operationally driven. And it turns out, it's an interesting thing, is that entrepreneurs, by their nature and by who they are the opportunity-driven people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be entrepreneurs. But I put to you this. If you go to a big company, and every big company has a succession plan. When this guy, leaves or dies or whatever, we got this guy that can take the job. And they got a succession plan for the CEO. And so they get a new CEO, and they get it typically from the inside. Sometimes they go outside, but typically they get it from the inside. And that person basically just, I'm going to be the CEO for 5 years or 10 years, and then there's going to be a guy behind me in the succession plan, and I don't want to mess up. I want things to be good while I'm here, so I have, so I can leave honorably and have a legacy. So I don't want to take a lot of risks. I just want, So when you have this succession of people in the company, you're basically hiring risk-averse people, and you have to go hire Satya Nadella if you want to transform the company. It can't be done by Steve Ballmer.
And so when you get to that sort of, you're heading towards the apogee and you bring all these operational people to kind of accelerate the path you want, and that kind of is the optimal time for you to go and arc again with that entrepreneurial spirit.
Not at the apogee, before the apogee, yeah.
So how do you balance that? You're bringing all these operational people in to accelerate and scale, and yet you have to...
It's not about the people you bring in, it's about the leader. It's always about the leader. Satya Nadella didn't transform the composition of the company overnight, but he basically said, we're going to do this. So that's what it's about.
So what is your input to that leader who's heading towards that arc of life? Historically they understand it, but what's the sort of emotional...
Do they understand it? I don't think a lot of people think about it actually in those terms. That's why I wrote the paper. It's because it gives you a framework to think about it. I don't think most people think about that.
So maybe just to double click on that, there's been a lot of discussion right now that strategic planning is kind of over. The world has changed so much so quickly that you can not predict quite as much anymore. So before that concept of that 5-year plan, that North Star, if you kind of play back the last 5 years and all the changes that have happened, the most recent one being LLMs and AI, it's so hard to predict. How do you bring those together? How do you bring together that strategic...
Well, if it's so hard to predict, why did Microsoft invest in OpenAI years ago? Come on, I don't believe any of this stuff that, the world is moving so fast you can't play. I don't believe any of that stuff. Really great people, great companies, they have an eye in the future. They don't always see everything, but they see a lot of things, okay? And the people who can see and can see the opportunity can make change, can make something happen. I truly believe that. And I believe it's so if you look at, and I'm a true believer in people having character. That is, I think we are born with a genetic mix in many, many different areas. But in the area that I'm talking about, I think some people it goes from risk seeking to risk avoidance, right? And the people who are out there, on a motorcycle jumping over things are risk seeking to a point of danger, right? And there's people who do nothing because they never want to take a risk, and they have anxiety all the time about what bad things could happen. And I think there's a whole spectrum. And I think you need to find someone on a spectrum who's saying, I am willing to take a risk. I want to think it through carefully. I understand the downside, but I'm going to do it anyway because the opportunity is so great. So that's that. And so if the spectrum looks like this, and this is the center, and this is the crazy, and this is the shut-in over here, it's somewhere in kind of the middle of that second half that these people exist, and they become entrepreneurs. I say to people, I taught entrepreneurship for 21 years, and you know what I learned? You can't teach someone to be an entrepreneur, but you can teach an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneur.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And that's because of the issue of character.
Thank you.
Which you can't change.
Got it. That's a lot there. Maybe you can talk about some of your other sort of teachings, and especially your pieces on leadership. And I'd love to sort of double click. We talked a lot about leadership and the concept of trust and how do you earn trust. Right. How do you think about, what would you sort of teach to these sort of upcoming entrepreneurs and leaders?
So I think trust is a sacred covenant between the leader and the led. I look to the military and say, how do they get people to listen to their leaders when they say, go out there and die? Right? I mean, they got to trust that person knows what they're doing. You go back and look at the history of war, and a lot of leaders get shot not by the enemy, but they get shot in the back because people think they're treating their lives frivolously, right? So I think that it's a profound covenant. I believe that you build trust by trusting first. That is, you don't say trust me, I'll take care of you. You say I trust you, and here's a way that I can demonstrate that I trust you. I give you information that other companies don't give you, which we did, by the way. One day, someone came to me and said, we're starting to get bigger, and we got more people, and some person in the operational side of the business said, well, we ought to put, badge readers all over the company, so we can make sure, And I said, well, why do we want to do that? He says, well, people can come in and steal a computer. I said, so what? We'll buy another one. I said, but if you put badge readers everybody says, oh, someone's watching me. And I don't think that's a good thing to do. People ought to come and go as they please. That's a demonstration of trust. People didn't know I was doing that. But if I put the badge readers in, they would know. Eventually we ended up with badge readers because all companies do. But, so that's an example, okay? So I think you trust first. You trust first with many small acts of trust, right? Someone's working on a project and you say, well, you sound like you know what you're doing. Please let me know how it's going. Instead of telling them something, right? So I believe in, as we talked about earlier, the bank of trust, right? As I say, the bank of trust, you can make deposits and you can make withdrawals, but they don't make loans. And when you come to your employee base, your company, and say, we're going into hard times and this is very difficult, trust me, if you haven't made some deposits of trust, then you're not going to have anything in the bank and nobody's going to trust you. People have to believe in you in order to trust you. And you have to go earn that. And you earn that by little acts all the time. And when people say, well, when you trust someone and then they betray your trust, what about that? And I say, much smaller cost than not trusting them to begin with. So you will get betrayed. Your trust will be betrayed from time to time, but it doesn't matter. It's not important. One of the things I'm most proud of, Veritas was a great, business success, great financial success, great stock market success. But the people who worked there said, this is the best company I ever worked for. I hear that all the time. It makes my heart sing. And it was because of the things that I was just talking about.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Let me give you one last little vignette. One of the things we were most proud of is with our covenant of a company that we tell you everything. And we used to worry about that as a management team. And I used to worry about it. And we got big. I remember we were at about 5,000 people. And I said, we used to all get in a room and we used to have an all hands meeting. I said, we don't do that anymore. It's really hard to do. How do we find some way of communicating that, we trust people and we're open and stuff like that? And we came up with an idea. It was kind of fun, right? Okay, we said, okay, all the managers worldwide, we have 5,000 people. I don't know how many managers, so call it 1,000, whatever, 800, whatever. It was a big number. We're going to have every week we have an executive committee meeting on Monday mornings. And once a month, we're going to have an open meeting. Everybody can call in and listen. We're not going to let you talk, but you can listen. And you can listen to the whole meeting. We're not going to tell you things we shouldn't tell everybody, but we'll tell you everything else. You'll understand what we're doing. So we had this open meeting. It's like, oh my God, this is like amazing, because everybody thinks you go into this room and you shut the door and, a few hours later, a little puff of white smoke's going to come out and it's going to be a new pope, right? I mean, it's like nobody knows what's going on in there. It's like a mystery. So we have this thing, right? And the first time the first meeting we do this with, like the lines are jammed and, I can't get in. And so it's like, 3 months later, I mean, we had 10% of the people showing up. Why? Because you guys do the same thing every week. You just talk about the stuff about running a company, and I'm busy. I don't have time for this. So we demystified it, and they felt like they could touch us, and they felt like they knew who we were, and they listened to the way we talked about things. It was a great idea.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I don't know any company that's ever done that. And by the way, when you make that announcement, it spreads like wildfire. Everybody knows you're doing it. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think we might just try that at our company. Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, so that's what we did. So, and I really cherished these ideas about trust and communicating to people and being open and honest and authentic, to be your authentic self all the time. I really believed in that stuff.
But if you kind of think about your time, 21 years at Stanford, board member, all these different things, what are the kind of key lessons that you want folks to take away, you think are the most important, most high impact?
Well, we taught a lot of things. I think probably, the impact that you have, it's very interesting because I used to tell stories occasionally in classroom, and I used to say I use stories to punctuate, right? So you talk about something, there'll be some case, and you talk about something, and there's some details in there, and everybody had an opinion, and you'd say, hey, so I had some experience in this area. Let me tell you a story. And it's interesting because when you do that in a classroom, like everybody goes from like this to like this, right? They kind of say, oh, I love hearing. Everybody loves hearing stories. People love stories. So, and then you tell the story, and then people remember the story because they love stories. And because they remember the story, they remember what they learned, right? So that's what I think. But I always tell people, I always have a end of class presentation, and I try to, say, okay, we're out of the classroom, we're not doing cases anymore. Let me tell you what I learned about leadership and about being a CEO and everything like that. And then I have two last slides which I use, and which I'm sure you've seen. And I say, if you're in business and you want a friend, buy a dog. Because as a CEO, your obligation is to the well-being of the entity and all the people in it, and not to any individual. You can't be more committed to one individual than committed to the mission, and that is a lonely thing, right? And then the second thing I tell people, which is kind of, I believe, words to live by, which is regret for the things you've done is tempered with time, but regret for the things you've never done is inconsolable. And to me, what that means is, you live your life and there are things you say you want to do and you don't do them, and many, many years later you look back and you say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I would have done it, I could have done it, I should have done it. And I said, and that is a tragedy. And I tell particularly the MBA students, your parents, your friends, your classmates all have an opinion about what you should do. It's a good job, it's got a lot of prestige, you're making a lot of money, whatever it is. I said, it's not important, because 40 years from now, most of them are going to be gone and the parents are going to be dead. So the decisions you make are the ones you personally have to live with for the rest of your life. And you should think about that in terms of doing what you think is the right thing for you and not worrying about all that stuff. And that's what I believe.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mark. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate your spending some time with us today.
Good. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
So happy to have Mark Leslie join us today on this podcast. If you're interested in more of this content, please subscribe, join our LinkedIn group, and engage with us. And we're so excited to bring you more of these ideas.